Welcome to the Arcaro Insights podcast, where we help B2B executives deliver better results with the latest ideas in change and innovation for your organization. The episodes feature fascinating discussions with interesting people who have a great story to tell, as well as our original content communicated with AI voices. If you can, please read the show notes to get the most from each episode. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy it.
This is a real danger mark about the transition to AI. This is going to be the greatest economic work practice revolution in our lifetimes. There's going to be a lot of dislocation in the economy and probably within corporations as well. We have to attend to the emotional side of that, to keep people aligned in certain values, to understand what's important, to be guided by certain principles. If we're not, if we start feeling like automatons in the service of AI, we're going to become worse at our work. We're going to be unhappier in our lives. Everybody's going to lose.
Welcome to the Arcaro Insights podcast. Our mission is to inform and equip business executives to manage change and innovation and make sense of complexity to succeed in the adaptive world. And today we have a guest who can take us a long way along this journey. Stephen Wunker will be speaking on his new book, AI and the Octopus Organization. His talk is about how the octopus serves as a model for how organizations can get the most benefit from AI. Wunker was a longtime colleague of innovation thought leader Clayton Christensen, led development of one of the world's first smartphones, and created pioneering companies in mobile marketing and commerce. He now runs New Markets Advisors, where he consults on innovation strategy and capabilities for organizations such as Microsoft, Meta, Nike, and the World Bank. He has written over 100 articles for publications including Forbes, the Harvard Business Review, and the Financial Times. Wunker has published 5 critically acclaimed books on innovation: Capturing New Markets, Jobs to be Done, Costovation, The Innovative Leader, and his latest, AI and the Octopus Organization. He has degrees from Princeton, Columbia, and Harvard Business School. Morning, Stephen. Welcome to the Arcaro Insights podcast. It's really good to have you on board. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, it's a great pleasure. I mean, I have to say, the minute I read your book and got the ideas of what you were trying to convey, I just said, how on earth do I persuade Stephen to come on board? Because this is completely the sort
I'm
of
easy,
thing.
Mark. You got me.
Because this is exactly the thing that's fascinating me at the moment. So having someone who's really thought about it is just brilliant. For those that haven't read the book, we're going to talk today about AI and the Octopus Organization. And Stephen creates this fabulous metaphor of the octopus. And then there's another that I'm going to let him tell us about in a minute, which really gives us some insight of comparing and contrasting old businesses versus new businesses and what needs to happen to be successful in the future. Let me not steal your fire. Stephen, tell me about this book.
This book is not a technology book. Don't be scared by AI in the title. It is about the effects of technology and what we need to do to get the most out of technology. So there are a lot of companies out there, I'd say most companies I've seen, that when they use AI, they're sort of sprinkling a little AI dust on top of their current practices. They're adding a feature here or there, maybe a chatbot, and that's fine, but that is not going to be transformative. Whereas AI is the most transformative technology we are probably going to see in our lifetime. And so we need to think about the operations of the organization and the ways we manage to really get the most out of the technology. So the book is both a call to do that as well as a look inside corporations that are doing that today, and hopefully a playbook for how you can do that in your organization.
I mean, I get it. I mean, I'm excited by AI, can see some of its challenges, but I'm excited. But you create an analogy of AI to, if I'm right, an asteroid hitting the Earth. What on earth is that about?
The meteor that killed the dinosaurs was a really asymmetric threat. Species had evolved over millennia to deal with the known predators, right? The giant dinosaur fish in the ancient seas. And most of those species died when the meteor struck because it was just such a different sort of threat they were not prepared for. And yet the octopus, this soft-shelled, rather defenseless creature, was able not only to survive, but to thrive as all of the pre existing competitors were wiped out in this mass extinction event. It is super adaptable, which is one thing we can learn from it. We can also learn from its anatomy. But we see AI today as one of those mass extinction effects. It is going to change so much about marketplaces and the way companies do business and the way customers buy that if you're not ahead of that curve, you're probably going to be swamped by the wave that it creates.
So we're going to talk a lot more about octopuses, or octopi, should I say.
Octopuses, it is a Greek, not a Latin term. And so
Thank you for my erudition on that one. That's great. So octopuses. But there's another creature that is sort of opposed, or is the ammonite. Why did you select the ammonite, and what does that represent?
well, I will admit the ammonite was suggested to us by ChatGPT because we were looking for a foil. And I had never heard of the ammonite, but ChatGPT had. So the Ammonites were plentiful in the ancient seas. There were actually over 10,000 species of Ammonites. And they're these very tightly coiled, thickly armored, nautilus looking like animals that could range from a few inches to several feet in diameter. They were everywhere. And they had these great defenses against the known predators. However, those defenses, those giant shells actually became a prison when the meteor struck because the meteor kicked up this humongous cloud of dust that covered the earth for 3 years. There was a lot of sulfur in that dust. The sulfur created acid rain, and the acid rain dissolved the shells of the young ammonites. So they all were very quickly wiped out. A lot of corporations are like the Ammonites. We have very tightly armored, thickly armored defenses against the known predators. And then when the meteor strikes, the asymmetric threat, they're utterly unprepared to deal with the fallout.
Gotcha. So I'm hearing that, that honed on years of MPA and it's in the 20th century, but just not suitable for what's going to come. So I think we've been talking about adaptive organizations. But your story is that AI is the catalyst for something that we've been feeling the need for, but is suddenly going to come.
That 100%, right? The internet wiped out some organizations. That's probably the closest thing in our lifetime to one of these meteor strikes. But AI has a much greater transformative potential than the internet. And so the mass extinction event is quite a threat, but it's also an opportunity for the octopuses out there as their known rivals get knocked out. There is a lot of additional room to grow for those who are prepared to adapt.
Gotcha. So I didn't tell you earlier on, but earlier in my life, I did train as a veterinarian and finished my studies. So that's why I was intrigued by the way you took the anatomy and the neurology and the physiology of the octopus to try to extend the metaphor further. And we're going to cover 4 ideas. The idea that there are 9 brains effectively in an octopus, that there is a neural network connecting these, which is, arguably more than a simple nervous system, and we can explore that later on. Not 1, not 2, but 3 hearts, which is quite special. And then fascinating tricks that they are able to do with proteins and RNA. And we're going to cover that shortly. But where do you want to kick off first, Stephen, in terms of this anatomical exploration of the octopus?
Let's start with the 9 brains. Look, an octopus has this alien-seeming anatomy to us humans. It's so different than the creatures that we're familiar with, partly because it's so prehistoric. It evolved in a very different time. So an octopus has one central brain in its head, but actually 2/3 of the neurons of an octopus are not in its head. They're distributed throughout the body. And each arm has a neural cluster that operates as sort of a mini brain. So effectively, there are 9 brains, and the arms' brains are all connected by a nerve ring. So one arm can be opening a clam and another is exploring a cave, and they can do this independently, communicating with each other without needing to involve the central brain, which is worried about how do I get away from that shark.
Yeah.
This enables massively parallel operations while also having synchrony and coordination. And it's a wonderful analogy for how AI distributes intelligence throughout an organization. That doesn't cause chaos, it can still be highly coordinated. And yet it enables this parallelism of action that allows organizations to be much more fast moving, much more responsive to their external environments than ever before.
Got it. There's the coordination. Because I think the way I take it, you've got to take a little bit of each of the four, and then we can tell the story about what it might mean to an organization. Because there are so many connections, I think, for me at least, between the ideas. So we've got one idea of distributed intelligence, which is, I think, we can sense from what we're seeing in AI. You've got the neural network. That's teaching us something, I think, about middle managers. Maybe we could explore that later. Three hearts. What were you getting at there?
So, an octopus has three hearts. They serve different purposes. One of the remarkable things about an octopus is it can actually give itself a heart attack. It can stop one of the hearts in order to direct energy to other hearts that are urgently needed for something like escaping from a predator. And so it has these distinct rhythms for different purposes. And organizations need to develop something similar, different rhythms for different purposes. We call them the analytic, the agile, and the aligned hearts.
Gotcha.
Usually, corporations are quite good at the analytic heart. The bigger enterprises aren't so great at being agile, the agile heart. And
Yeah.
then the aligned heart is essential given the amount of change that's happening with the advent of AI and other phenomena as well that are occurring in the environment and the economy. So having all those three operating together for different purposes, for different reasons at different times, that's really important.
I think you're actually right. I just want to challenge you a little bit, where my perspective of the world is it's not as odd, this odd anatomy of hearts and neural tissue as we might think. In humans, do you know that we've got a thing called the vagus nerve? It's an enormous nerve that when I was a student, they didn't really know what it did, but now there's so much science coming out of that about the gut-brain communication and the neural network around the heart. So it's not completely bizarre to think about heartfelt leadership as a neuronal event. It's not completely bizarre to think about gut feelings. And, I'll think about that overnight. It's not an irrational thought, given the amount of communication from the gut to the brain and how we process information. So I resonated well with the different types of hearts giving communication. And maybe we can explore later, but I think you're right about corporations being very analytical. One of the other things about large corporations as well is not being so agile. They're not necessarily the best place for heartfelt leadership, giving heartfelt inspiration and trust. That's something we can explore about what leaders might need to do in the future as well. Yeah.
So, this is a real danger mark
Yeah.
about the transition to AI. This is going to be the greatest economic work practice revolution in our lifetimes.
Mm.
There's going to be a lot of dislocation in the economy and probably within corporations as well. We have to attend to the emotional side of that, to keep people aligned in certain values, to understand what's important, to be guided by certain principles. If we start feeling like automatons in the service of AI, we're going to become worse at our work. We're going to be unhappier in our lives. Everybody's going to lose. So alignment is really essential.
I'd say alignment is a table stakes. Maybe think about it. To make AI successful, we have to be honest about what we're good at and honest about what we're not good at. So let I take away the boring, tedious stuff, freeing us up to be creative, which is emotional. If we can have leaders to switch us on to that task and give us from being 20, 30, 40% of our lives being creative to 80% of our lives being creative, what an opportunity that creates if leaders can step up to the challenge.
We use examples in the book of how AI actually makes work more fulfilling. So look at Stripe, the payments company. They have a AI-enabled suite of products for online checkout that presents the forms of payment that they think customers were going to most want to value that will lead to conversion from browser to buyer on a website while also minimizing fraud. Now, what that means for the people in the fraud prevention team is that rather than auditing transaction after transaction in an extremely boring manner, their attention can now focus on the edge cases or the highest risk cases. So they are challenged in their jobs. They're using the full suite of their skills in a way that makes them more fulfilled in what they do and also makes them more productive for the organization. That's the promise of AI for the front line. It should help people be more fulfilled, not make them feel like automatons.
With that mindset, let's embrace it and be excited about the future. One more, I think, and I'm going to circle back to all for in a minute, but there was the one bit of the anatomy, or not so much anatomy, but the protein production system and how the RNA works in an octopus. Why did you include that in the?
This is actually how we came upon the octopus analogy. My colleague Jonathan Brill, who's the futurist at Amazon, had been using this story for a couple of years in his talks about how most of us are governed by our DNA, right? We humans, we're governed by our DNA. There's not much we can do about that. And we can change RNA a little bit, but it's a very small set of degrees of freedom and it takes a long time. Whereas an octopus and other creatures in the cephalopod family are able to edit their RNA in a matter of hours. So you can take an Antarctic octopus and put it into the Caribbean and it'll be just fine because it can change that RNA. So I'll take us back to high school biology for a moment. DNA is inherited from our parents and it changes very slowly over millennia. RNA is the molecule inside cells that goes from the DNA to the rest of the cells. So it creates this sort of messenger function. And that's akin to managers in organizations. There's not a lot they can do about their DNA, right? The culture, the legacy of fixed assets, that's going to change very slowly. But the managers can translate from that into the actions of people in their teams,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they can edit the RNA. They can be the RNA of their organizations. And we need to do that like an octopus. This is how the octopus was able to survive the meteor strike because it could edit its RNA. So similarly, we need to do the same, recognizing there's stuff we can't change. We can't change the DNA very much, but we sure can change our management actions and the instructions and encouragement we give to our teams.
And so in the real world, what does that mean? What are the different behaviors that middle managers should be doing?
So, for one, they need to get people onto common AI platforms. If half the people are on it and half aren't, then they're using it for different purposes. Then it's this very disconnected set of upgrades here and there. It doesn't create a systemic change. They need to have a clear vision about where they're headed.
Yeah.
So, what are the business purposes of using AI and other technological tools?
Yeah.
What is their organization going to look like? What are the common practices? What are going to be the metrics that assess whether they're actually making this sort of progress or not? What change in behaviors do people need to have encouragement along? Because everybody is going to need to be a change manager. That's a set of what these middle managers need to be doing. They need to become coaches. They need to become stewards of AI. And they also have to keep critically thinking to not just be governed by AI, but use that as one input among many. AI is not going to capture everything from a context. So, to make sure that the inputs of AI are united with other inputs to actually make the best decisions.
But you've just said something which is so relevant to something I was reading and writing this morning. You know this, but for the benefit of the listeners, right? In one survey, 80% of business strategies has got AI as being core to the business strategy. Yet in those same businesses, only 15% of the employees believe it. They think it's just baloney. Another common problem, people aren't buying in because they just see it as the shiny new toy, which is bought in because it's technically interesting, maybe, FOMO, don't want to be seen to be missing out on AI, but not really aligned with solving problems on the ground in workflow processes, and certainly not totally connected with the business. So what you're saying about alignment of the brain and then the translation role of middle managers, it sounds to be spot on from what I'm hearing elsewhere. Absolutely. Hey, it is time for a quick break. We hope you are enjoying the podcast. If you have any comments or questions, the show notes for this episode have our contact details. We would love to hear from you. Perhaps you might have an idea for a future podcast. And now let's continue.
I think people intuitively get that AI is a major transition. And a lot of boards get this, and there's pressure on top leadership to make a transition, but it is often being thought about in technological terms. Of course, technology matters, but the technology is also moving so fast that
Yeah.
if we focus on that, we're missing the broader picture of how the organization needs to transform much more holistically than just layering on technology. There are many managers that get that too, I think, but there has not been a way to look upon that overall transition in a thorough, holistic sort of manner. And I think the Octopus model does that.
Echoing words that people like Ostavada use a lot is exploit and explore. I mean, managers are typically exploiting and optimizing. Most managers, except for the few involved in innovation or new business development, are not in large corporations focused on exploring. And that's one of the transitions it sounds like we're going to have to make as well to get us through.
The world is changing so fast with AI and other sort of macroeconomic shocks too, right? If we're not constantly exploring, if we're not developing growth options, then we are highly exposed to acting like the world did over the past 50 years. I think one thing that is for certain is that the world is not going to act like it has over the past 50 years. So, conventional wisdom is an extremely hazardous thing in unconventional times. We have to keep exploring and developing our options.
So, if I can start bringing these four ideas together, so we've got the heartfelt leadership, the alignment of the organization, an agile part of the organization, we've got connectiveness and the RNA of the middle managers acting as coaches, bringing it together. We have distributed decision making when leaders forcing down decision or enabling decision making, may be a better way of doing it. What type of organizations are anywhere near that at the moment so that we can think about this for real?
So let's look at HelloFresh. They are the world's largest meal kit delivery company. Now, they had a boom time in the pandemic as people wanted to cook at home, but then things sort of tapered off after the pandemic and they needed something new. So they decided to lean really heavily into AI. And this worked wonders throughout the organization. It started with the customers. So customers had traditionally had this thick set of options to choose from for their meals for the month. But HelloFresh actually knew that you usually substituted chicken for pork, and I like things a little bit spicier. They knew people's personal profiles on what they chose and then how they rated meals afterwards. And so they're now able to give people hyper tailored suggestions for what they would really love. Great. So that's a change in the customer value proposition. But this also meant that operations had to change. No longer would there be these long production runs of particular products. The kitchens, which are huge industrial kitchens, have to create hyper tailored meals basically for each person. You have this almost infinite variety of meals. And that meant that the job of a middle manager in operations changed too. No longer were they creating the Excel spreadsheets with these long production runs. Operations became so complex that only AI could do the production planning. And then that affected sourcing in terms of the ingredients. So everything had to be connected through a neural necklace of from, customer value proposition, what people actually chose to the operations to the sourcing. AI had to be responsible for that. And then the middle managers had to be the stewards of the model. They needed to make sure that the choices that were being made sense. And then they had to shepherd their workforces through a massive change in everything that was done. And that's been a great success for them. They really leaned hard into AI and they reinvented how their organization worked.
That's amazing. And I'm guessing that one of the opportunities is that someone in the organization has been born creative in selecting menus and coming up with new dishes and the like, which is making things that aren't necessarily AI couldn't do. As you look at it, how long do you think this transition is going to be? What type of industries are going to be most amenable to change? Where is going to be the biggest challenges, do you think?
So, as I said, my co author, Jonathan, is the futurist at Amazon. He estimates that roughly by 2030, there's going to be a 30 times improvement in quality of AI outputs, while the cost per token, per computing unit, will decline on the order of around 100,000 times. That's a humongous change. It is a faster rate of change than almost anything we've seen in our lifetimes. So call it 5 years. And actually, the technology is going to progress a lot faster than the organizations will, on average. But as with the internet age, there are going to be a few organizations, there are going to be the Amazons out there
Yes.
that get it, and they're going to move very fast and take advantage of this. So, look, I started consulting in the late 90s at a major strategy firm. And I saw this evolution from 1996, 97. Oh, let's go put our brochure on a website to 98, 99. The sky is falling and we have to do something massive right now.
Yeah.
Neither of those is healthy. There needs to be a phase transition that you plan out. Sure, there needs to be some agility and adjustment in the plan, but you need to get started now. We can't wait to the equivalent of 1998 and 99 and then do humongous, incredibly risky things because some competitor is the wolf at the door.
So I'm guessing that Amazon is moving ahead in this type of area, obviously because your colleague works there. So is there anything we can learn from what Amazon does in their work practices to help us think about how this can be happening?
So I'll give you two, and these actually came from Jeff Bezos in the early days of Amazon. He insisted back 25 years ago that all Amazon services had to be able to talk, technologically speaking, to each other. So there were no closed sets of data. Everything had to be opened and flowing as data around the organization. That's really important. AI is only as good as the data that it uses. So ensuring that that data is commonly available is quite important. And then secondly, he enumerated a list of principles. There's now 16 of them that govern how the 1.5 million Amazon employees operate. Things like it's always day one. So that creates cohesion in this enormous enterprise that could very quickly lose that sort of coherence. Principles are what actually enable it to operate both with great agility, but also with cohesion and purpose. So it's much more than the sum of the parts.
Now, that's another great topic of mine. The idea of rules and emergence is counterintuitive, but absolutely true. Is the greatest creativity is probably evolution. That's the most powerful creative force we've ever seen.
Let me give you an example from the book of some research we cited on playgrounds. So, if you put a bunch of kids on an open playground, they will tend to cluster towards the big sort of play sets at the center, the slide, the swings, things like that. However, if you build a fence around the playground, the kids are going to use all of the playground. They'll go right up to the fence. There's always an implicit fence in people's minds. But if people don't know where the fence is, they tend to stick to the center of the playground. Usually in organizations, that fence is actually further out than a lot of the staff think it is. By setting clear boundaries around the use of AI, around strategies, around the degrees of organizational change, whatever it might be, you actually enable a tremendous amount of freedom, just like for those kids on the playground.
So right. I don't know if you're agreeing with me, but I think one of the worst things you can say in an ideation session is blue sky thinking or out of the box thinking. Innovation comes from rules and constraints. It's a paradox to many, but it's shown, evolution shows us again, is that if you create, Bezos seems to have 16 high value rules in his organization, but once those constraints are put in, innovation clearly happens. And it's impossible to argue with the Amazon story and, where things come from, like the cloud computing was almost other people would have seen that as a byproduct, and yet Amazon makes it a core revenue center. So as we're beginning to come to the end, what advice would you give? Three groups, business leaders, current middle managers, and people entering the workforce right now. What would be a couple of takeaways from this podcast to think about?
Senior leaders need to lean in and champion adaptation, and they need to fundamentally rethink what they do. What is your company's business? How does it make money? How does it compete? What do customers value? How do you operate? All of those things need to be questioned, rethought in the AI age. Middle management needs to lean into new skills. They need to become change managers, even if they're in a super technical function. They need to be change managers, and they also need to embrace critical thinking. To use AI outputs, sure, but to unite that with all sorts of other contextual cues to help make great decisions, and then coach their teams to do this as well. They are not anymore going to be much information processors. AI does that quite well, but that doesn't mean their job is going away, it just changes. Now, for people entering the workforce, if they can dance with AI, not do things on their own, not just rely on AI. This is more of an elegant two-person dance or person and machine dance, where the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts. If you can coax AI to give you great outputs, question it. Think about what are really the important questions to ask. Unite its answers with other sorts of cues, just as mill managers should be doing. Then these entry level people can be supercharged in their capabilities. There may well be fewer of these entry level people, but they can do much, much more if they can get the most out of AI.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much. I trust you've touched a few heartstrings and inspired our listeners, but I really enjoyed our time together. Thank you very much. And I just can't wait until you tell me what your next great book is. By the way, I should have mentioned this early on in the beginning, is I first met Stephen because of Jobs to be Done. He was the first man who introduced me to Jobs to be Done, and he's taken us all the way through to this. So I am sure we're going to have another greatly inspiring book in a few years' time, if not sooner. Thank you again, Stephen. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening to the Arcaro Insights podcast. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed producing it for you. If you have not done so already, please do subscribe with your favorite podcast provider. Even better, it would be hugely appreciated if you could share the podcast with friends and colleagues. Thank you.